May 24, 1908, Chicago, Illinois. On that spring morning, in a crowded Italian neighborhood on the city's near west side, Salvatore Sam Giancana was born into a world that offered very little mercy. Chicago was loud, divided, and already ruled by forces most people never saw: corruption, fear, and power operating quietly behind closed doors. No one looking at that newborn could have imagined what he would become. Not a politician, not a businessman, but a man whose name would one day be whispered in courtrooms, FBI offices, casinos, and private rooms where decisions were made without paper trails. Sam Giancana grew up watching how the city truly worked. He learned early that Chicago wasn't controlled by laws, it was controlled by men. Men who understood loyalty, intimidation, and silence. Men who didn't need titles to command obedience. By his teenage years, Giancana had already chosen his path. He wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the loudest, but he was observant, ruthless when necessary, and patient. Qualities that mattered far more in the underworld than brute force. As Prohibition turned Chicago into a battlefield of bootleggers and gang leaders, Giancana quietly climbed the ranks. While others drew attention to themselves, he learned the value of operating in the shadows. Power, he realized, was most effective when people weren't sure who was pulling the strings. By the 1950s, Sam Giancana wasn't just another mobster. He was the boss of the Chicago Outfit, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country. From gambling to unions, from Las Vegas to political backrooms, his influence reached far beyond the streets where he grew up. But Giancana's ambition didn't stop with crime. He moved comfortably among celebrities, entertainers, and figures who appeared untouchable. He believed himself to be indispensable, too connected, too informed, too powerful to ever be removed. And for a time, he was right. Yet power has a way of attracting attention, and attention is dangerous. The same secrecy that protected Sam Giancana would eventually isolate him. The same connections that elevated him would become liabilities, and the city that once bent to his will would watch quietly as his empire began to crack. This is the story of how Sam Giancana ruled Chicago's underworld, and how everything he built slowly, inevitably, slipped away.
As a teenager, Sam Giancana didn't drift into crime by accident. He was recruited by it. On Chicago's west side, the streets were already divided into territories, and one group in particular was gaining attention: the 42 Gang. Despite the name, it wasn't a harmless neighborhood crew. It was a proving ground, a feeder system for the future leaders of the Chicago underworld. The 42 Gang specialized in robberies, extortion, and street-level enforcement. But more importantly, it trained young men to survive in a world built on loyalty and silence. This is where Giancana learned discipline. This is where he learned that reputation mattered more than violence, and that fear was most effective when it was controlled. Even among hardened teenagers, Giancana stood out. He developed a reputation for being unpredictable but calculated. He didn't act emotionally. He watched, he remembered, and when action was required, he acted decisively. That reputation traveled quickly, not just through the streets, but upward. By the late 1930s, Giancana had caught the attention of the Chicago Outfit. The Outfit was not a street gang, it was a corporation, organized, strategic, and deeply embedded in Chicago's economy. It controlled unions, politicians, transportation routes, and entire industries operating in plain sight. To be noticed by its leadership meant you had already proven yourself dangerous and useful. Giancana was brought in. At first, his work was quiet: collections, enforcement, and oversight of gambling operations. But he had a talent others lacked: expansion. He understood that real power didn't come from territory alone, but from influence beyond city limits. During the 1940s and 1950s, Giancana was entrusted with something few mobsters ever received: control of major illegal operations outside Chicago, particularly in Louisiana. Louisiana was strategic. It was a hub for illegal liquor distribution, gambling, and political rackets. Local officials were pliable, enforcement was inconsistent, and profits were enormous. Giancana didn't just supervise operations, he systemized them. Money moved upward smoothly, protection payments flowed without interruption, political pressure was applied quietly, effectively. Back in Chicago, his influence grew even stronger. One of the most significant moves of Giancana's career came in the early 1940s when the Chicago outfit targeted a deeply rooted operation inside the city's Black American community, the illegal lottery payout system, often referred to as the numbers game. This system generated massive daily cash flow and was largely independent of the Italian mob. Giancana was directly involved in its takeover. It wasn't done recklessly, it was methodical. Key figures were pressured, absorbed, or removed. The outfit gained control of a cash machine that ran every single day across entire neighborhoods. That operation alone made Giancana indispensable. By the 1950s, his reach was undeniable. Gambling, liquor distribution, political influence, interstate operations, all roads passed through him. And while other leaders preferred visibility and ceremony, Giancana preferred control. When leadership within the Chicago outfit shifted, there was no real debate. In 1957, Sam Giancana became boss of the Chicago outfit. It wasn't announced publicly. It didn't need to be. Everyone who mattered already knew. From a teenage gang member in the 42 gang to the most powerful criminal figure in Chicago, Giancana had climbed every level of the underworld without ever losing sight of what mattered most: control, loyalty, and silence. But reaching the top changed the rules. As boss, Giancana was no longer protected by anonymity. Every decision carried weight, every connection drew scrutiny, and the same system that had lifted him up was now watching him closely. Because in the underworld, power is never permanent, and every empire, no matter how carefully built, eventually invites its own destruction. By the mid-1950s, Sam Giancana was no longer rising. He had arrived. But power inside the Chicago outfit was never handed over cleanly. It was taken piece by piece, through fear, strategy, and money. And one of the bloodiest chapters of that transition unfolded on Chicago's South Side. At the center of it was the policy game, the illegal lottery that generated staggering amounts of daily cash. While the outfit had already made inroads into gambling operations, the South Side policy network was still partially outside its full control. That resistance would not last. The final takeover came through terror. Another outfit enforcer, Jackie the Lackey Cerrone, was sent to deal with a powerful figure known as Big Jim Martin. Cerrone didn't kill him. That wasn't the message. Instead, Martin took 2 bullets to the head and lived, fleeing to Mexico in fear. The meaning was clear: stay away, or the next attempt would not be symbolic. With Martin gone, the policy game was fully absorbed. And when the lottery money began flowing into outfit hands, it came in millions of dollars a year. Cash moved daily, quietly, reliably. For Giancana, this was more than profit. It was proof. Proof that he could dominate not just individuals, but entire systems. That success pushed him to the very top. In 1957, Sam Giancana was formally anointed boss of the Chicago outfit. But his elevation came with limits. The old guard, Tony Accardo and Paul Ricca, stepped back into semi-retirement, but no one misunderstood the reality. Accardo became consigliere. Ricca remained a guiding force. Giancana held the title, but he was required to consult them on all major decisions. Power in Chicago was layered. Still, Giancana's confidence only grew. That same year, he attended one of the most infamous gatherings in Mafia history, the Appalachian Meeting, held at the upstate New York estate of Joseph Barbera. Crime bosses from across the country converged in what they believed was secrecy. Instead, it ended in disaster when law enforcement swarmed the area. The meeting exposed the national scope of organized crime to the public for the first time. Later, Giancana was overheard on an FBI wiretap speaking with Buffalo boss Stefano Magaddino, criticizing the choice of location. Giancana insisted the meeting should have been held in Chicago. He claimed the city was the safest place in the world for such a gathering. Why? Because, according to Giancana, he had multiple police chiefs on his payroll. If the syndicate ever met in or around Chicago, he said they had nothing to fear. The area was locked up tight. It was a revealing statement, not just of confidence, but of how deeply corruption ran under his leadership. Giancana's ambitions, however, were no longer limited to Chicago or even the United States. One of his close associates, Hyman Larner, helped expand outfit gambling and smuggling operations into Panama and Iran. The Miami operations headquarters was quietly shifted to Panama, where local banks made money laundering easier and less visible. From there, something unprecedented began to take shape. These overseas operations became a partnership between the Mafia and the CIA, an alliance built not on trust, but on mutual utility. By 1966, that relationship expanded even further, evolving into arms smuggling to the Middle East, including shipments connected to the Israeli Mossad, routed through Panama. Crime, intelligence, and geopolitics blurred into a single operation. Back in the United States, Giancana relied heavily on Richard Kane, a corrupt Chicago police officer who acted as his courier and financial advisor. Kane made frequent trips to and from Mexico, moving money, messages, and intelligence. The boundary between law enforcement and organized crime had all but collapsed. But Giancana's visibility was becoming dangerous. In 1959, he was summoned before the Select Committee on Improper Activities in Labor and Management. Sitting across from him was Bobby Kennedy, relentless and openly hostile. The hearings placed Giancana under a national spotlight, one he could not control. The same man who once operated comfortably in the shadows was now answering questions on the public record. And for someone like Giancana, exposure was the beginning of the end. He had built an empire through secrecy, intimidation, and silence. But as investigations deepened, alliances strained, and federal intensity intensified, that silence began to crack. The systems he mastered now worked against him. By the late 1960s, the outfit was no longer unified. The government was no longer blind. And Giancana's confidence, once his greatest strength, had become his greatest liability. The underworld he ruled so completely was closing in on him, and soon the consequences of power, ambition, and visibility would arrive, quietly, suddenly, and without warning.
By 1960, Sam Giancana was no longer just a crime boss. He was a man whose influence had quietly crossed into places most Americans believed were protected from organized crime: national politics, intelligence agencies, and global power struggles. And it all came to a head during one of the most consequential elections in American history. The 1960 presidential election between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon was razor thin. Every state mattered, every voting bloc mattered. And behind the public speeches and televised debates, forces were working that would never appear on the campaign trail. In later years, journalists, investigators, and former insiders would claim that Giancana and the Chicago outfit played a role in Kennedy's victory. The allegation was simple and explosive. According to Chuck Giancana, Sam's half-nephew, Giancana once said plainly, "I helped get Jack elected, and in return, he calls off the heat." The deal, as it was described, was never written down. It didn't need to be.
This was the kind of arrangement understood through implication. According to Giancana's longtime mistress Judith Exner and supported by accounts from Tina Sinatra, daughter of Frank Sinatra, Giancana used his influence to pressure labor unions into supporting Kennedy. Union support, particularly in Illinois and other key states, could swing elections, and Giancana understood leverage better than most men alive. Exner later claimed Giancana bragged openly that Kennedy would never have been elected without him. If true, it would mean that one of the most iconic presidencies in American history had been quietly assisted by one of the country's most powerful crime bosses. But whatever expectations Giancana had, they would not be met. Because once Kennedy entered the White House, the man Giancana feared far more than the president himself took center stage: Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. Robert Kennedy launched one of the most aggressive crackdowns on organized crime the country had ever seen. Prosecutions increased, surveillance intensified, pressure mounted. To Giancana, it felt like betrayal. If there had ever been an understanding, real or imagined, it was now meaningless, and the resentment cut deep. Around this same time, Giancana's world intersected with something even more secretive than organized crime: the Central Intelligence Agency. In the aftermath of the Cuban Revolution, the CIA was desperate. Fidel Castro had overthrown Fulgencio Batista, shutting down American business interests and dismantling Mafia-controlled casinos that had generated millions of dollars a year. The CIA needed Castro removed, and they needed people who could operate without paperwork, without hesitation, and without moral debate. According to testimony later uncovered during the Church Committee hearings, the CIA recruited members of the Mafia, including Sam Giancana, to assist in assassination attempts against Castro. Giancana reportedly summed up the relationship bluntly: "The CIA and the Cosa Nostra are different sides of the same coin." The partnership was transactional. The Mafia wanted Castro gone because he had destroyed their Cuban operations. The CIA wanted him gone for geopolitical reasons. Their interests aligned. Documents later released confirmed that in September 1960, the CIA sent former FBI agent Robert Maheu to approach Giancana's network. Maheu concealed his CIA affiliation, presenting himself instead as a representative of international corporations harmed by Castro's actions. Maheu first contacted Johnny Rosselli, Giancana's West Coast representative and trusted lieutenant. Rosselli refused payment, but introduced Maheu to two men, Sam Gold and Joe. Sam Gold was Sam Giancana. Joe was Santo Traficante Jr., the powerful Tampa boss with deep ties to pre-revolution Cuba. Maheu offered $150,000 for the assassination of Castro. According to CIA records, none of the men accepted payment. The job itself, however, moved forward. Giancana suggested poison, discreet, deniable, and effective. The CIA provided poison pills, which Giancana passed to a man named Juan Orta, whom Giancana claimed was a corrupt official within Castro's government. Orta attempted multiple times to introduce the poison into Castro's food and drink. 6 attempts were made. All failed. Eventually, Orta withdrew, terrified. A second attempt followed, involving Anthony Verona, commander of the Cuban exile junta. That effort, too, collapsed, derailed by disorganization, distrust, and the looming disaster of the Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961. The program was quietly abandoned, but the implications were staggering. A sitting U.S. intelligence agency had partnered with organized crime to assassinate a foreign leader, and Sam Giancana sat at the center of it. Meanwhile, Giancana's personal life was becoming entangled with his public risks. Judith Exner claimed she acted as a courier between Giancana and President Kennedy, delivering messages related to Cuba. She later alleged she was romantically involved with both men.
Giancana's daughter, Antoinette, would later claim her father exaggerated or manipulated aspects of the CIA relationship, suggesting he may have been running a scam to pocket agency funds. Truth and myth blurred. Even Giancana's romantic relationships crossed dangerous lines. According to declassified documents known as the family jewels, Giancana asked Maheu to wire the room of his mistress, singer Phyllis McGuire, whom he suspected of infidelity. The wire was never installed. The agent tasked with planting it was arrested, and in a remarkable turn, Robert F. Kennedy personally intervened to halt prosecution, allegedly at the CIA's request. The overlap between crime, intelligence, and politics was now impossible to ignore. Giancana's confidence never wavered, but the walls were closing in. By the mid-1960s, his name appeared in congressional hearings, FBI files, and declassified intelligence documents. His protection was thinning, his usefulness was diminishing, and in the underworld, usefulness was survival. Sam Giancana had reached a level of power few criminals ever touched, influencing elections, negotiating with intelligence agencies, and shaping events far beyond Chicago. But he had also crossed a line. When a man knows too much, sees too much, and speaks too freely, he becomes a liability. The alliances that once shielded him now endangered him. The secrecy that built his empire now threatened to expose it, and the same system that once relied on him was preparing to move on. Because in that world, history is not written by the powerful, it is written by the survivors. And Sam Giancana was running out of both time and allies.
By the mid-1960s, the walls were no longer closing in on Sam Giancana. They had already closed. On June 1, 1965, the man who once ruled Chicago's underworld was summoned before a federal grand jury. This was not a casual inquiry. It was part of a broader effort by the U.S. government to dismantle organized crime at its highest levels, and Giancana was no longer just a rumor or a shadowy figure. He was a target. Prosecutors believed Giancana knew too much about the Chicago outfit, about political corruption, about intelligence operations, about deals that were never supposed to exist. To ensure he would talk, the government granted him full immunity. In theory, that meant Giancana could not be prosecuted based on anything he said. In practice, it meant something else entirely. Because when Sam Giancana took his seat before the grand jury, he said nothing. Question after question was asked. Name after name was mentioned. Operation after operation was outlined. And every time, Giancana gave the same response. Silence. He refused to answer. He refused to cooperate. He refused to break the one rule that had protected him his entire life: never talk. The court had little patience for defiance. Giancana was found in contempt of court and sentenced to jail. Not for weeks, not for months, but for the full duration of the grand jury. More than a year behind bars. For a man who once controlled police chiefs, judges, and politicians, the humiliation was absolute. But the damage went far beyond prison. While Giancana sat in a cell, the real shift happened quietly and without him. Behind closed doors, the true power brokers of the Chicago outfit made a decision. Tony Accardo and Paul the waiter Rica, men who had always been the final authority, decided Giancana was no longer useful. Worse, he was dangerous. His public exposure, his defiance, his growing reputation as a liability had become impossible to ignore. And so while Giancana remained silent in court, his position was taken from him. He was officially deposed as operational boss. His replacement was Joseph "Joey Doves" Ayupa, a loyal, quieter figure who knew how to follow instructions and stay out of headlines. Giancana had not been informed.
He had not been consulted. By the time he realized what had happened, the decision was irreversible. For the first time since rising through the ranks as a teenager, Sam Giancana was no longer in control of anything. When he was finally released from prison in 1966, the world he returned to was unrecognizable. The outfit had moved on. His protection was gone, and federal authorities were waiting. More grand jury subpoenas loomed, more questioning, more pressure. Giancana understood what was coming, and he understood something else, too. If he stayed in the United States, he would either be forced to talk or he would be silenced. So he did what many fallen bosses before him had done. He fled. Giancana quietly left the country and settled in Cuernavaca, Mexico, a city known for its mild climate, wealthy expatriates, and relative distance from American law enforcement. From there, he lived cautiously. No public displays, no large entourage, no obvious signs of power. He was no longer the man who once claimed Chicago was locked up tight. He was an exile. But exile does not mean safety. Giancana was still watched, still remembered, still feared. And in 1974, that fragile distance collapsed. On July 19, 1974, Mexican authorities arrested Sam Giancana. There was no dramatic chase, no resistance. The decision had already been made. Within days, Giancana was placed on a plane and deported to the United States. On July 21, 1974, he arrived back in Chicago, the city that had made him powerful, then discarded him. This time, he returned not as a boss, but as a man under scrutiny. Federal investigators were waiting. Congressional committees were waiting. Old enemies were watching. And perhaps most dangerously, former allies were listening. Giancana was now expected to testify about everything he had once refused to discuss. The CIA, Castro plots, political influence, organized crime at the highest levels. He knew too much, and this time he might not be able to remain silent. Sam Giancana had spent his life navigating danger through secrecy and discipline, but the rules had changed. The government no longer feared exposing him, the outfit no longer protected him, and the intelligence world no longer needed him. In the underworld, that combination was fatal. Giancana was alive, but his margin for survival had never been thinner, because in his world there was one unforgivable sin. Not betrayal, not ambition, not even failure. The unforgivable sin was becoming a problem, and Giancana had become exactly that.
By the summer of 1975, Sam Giancana was living on borrowed time. After his forced return to the United States, federal authorities understood something very clearly. Giancana was no ordinary witness. He was a man who sat at the intersection of organized crime, intelligence agencies, and national politics. And he was scheduled to talk. Police officers were assigned to guard his home in Oak Park, Illinois, a quiet suburban neighborhood that felt worlds away from the streets where Giancana had built his reputation. On the surface, it looked like protection. In reality, it was an acknowledgement of danger. Giancana was preparing to appear before the Church Committee, a powerful Senate investigation examining illegal activities by U.S. intelligence agencies, including alleged collusion between the CIA and the Cosa Nostra. If Giancana testified fully, decades of secrets could surface. Someone, somewhere, did not want that to happen. On the night of June 19, 1975, just days before his scheduled appearance, Sam Giancana was at home. He had recently returned from Houston, where he had undergone gallbladder surgery. He was still recovering, weakened, slower,
vulnerable. Sometime that evening, Giancana went down to the basement kitchen. According to later reports, he was frying sausage and peppers, a small, ordinary moment in a life defined by extraordinary danger. Shortly before 11 p.m., a gunman entered the house through the basement. There were no signs of forced entry upstairs, no struggle, no alarms. The killer knew exactly where to go. Using a .22 caliber pistol, the gunman fired 7 shots into Giancana's head and neck. The weapon was likely fitted with a suppressor. The shots were precise, efficient, final. Sam Giancana never stood a chance. Around 11 p.m., his caretaker, Joseph DiPersio, found the body lying on the basement kitchen floor. The stove was still on. The most powerful crime boss Chicago had ever produced was dead. Not in a shootout, not in a courtroom, but alone in his basement. The murder shocked the country, but among those who understood the rules of that world, there was no surprise. Within days, Michael J. Corbett, police chief of Willow Springs, Illinois, and a man with deep mob connections, was told something revealing by Salvatore Bastone, a Chicago outfit capo. Bastone spoke casually, almost reflectively. He talked about Tony Spilotro, the volatile enforcer who would later become infamous in Las Vegas. Bastone said Giancana loved Spilotro, believed in him, protected him when others questioned his behavior. Giancana had put Spilotro on the map, backed him during disputes, defended him even when the skim from Las Vegas became a problem. And crucially, Bastone mentioned something chilling. Spilotro knew how to enter Giancana's house without being seen. He knew the back routes, the fences, the neighboring yards. When Corbett asked Bastone why Giancana was killed, Bastone gave an answer that said everything and nothing. "There's never just one reason for shit like what happened to Sam," he said. "There's a million of 'em." Then he added a warning disguised as wisdom. "Let's just say that Sam should have remembered what happened to Bugsy Siegel." The message was clear. When a man becomes bigger than the system eventually corrects itself. The investigation that followed produced no arrest, no conviction, and no official resolution. But theories multiplied. One suspect was Dominic Butch Blasi, a longtime associate who had been with Giancana earlier that evening. He was questioned extensively, yet neither the FBI nor Giancana's daughter, Antoinette, believed Blasi pulled the trigger. Years later, a different version emerged. In the 2000s, Nicholas Calabrese, a hitman turned FBI informant, claimed he knew details of the killing. According to him, Tony Accardo, the real power behind the Chicago outfit, approved the hit. Calabrese alleged that Angelo La Pietra disposed of the murder weapon, a suppressed pistol manufactured by Frank Calabrese Sr. and Ronnie Jarrett. If true, it would mean Giancana was eliminated not by outsiders, but within his own organization. Another theory pointed south. Some believed Santo Trafficante Jr., the Tampa crime boss, and Giancana's former partner in CIA-linked operations, ordered the murder. The motive was simple: fear. Giancana was about to testify, and he knew about CIA Mafia assassination plots against Fidel Castro. The timing fueled suspicion. Just weeks before Giancana's death, Johnny Rosselli, another key figure in those CIA operations, was found murdered, his body chopped up and stuffed into an oil drum floating off the coast of Miami. Many believed Rosselli had been silenced. Was Giancana next? Then there was the most controversial theory of all, that the CIA itself was involved. Rumors circulated that Giancana had become a liability, too talkative, too visible, too dangerous. Some former intelligence insiders hinted at shadowy figures in the area, like William Harvey, a known CIA assassin. The agency denied everything. Former CIA Director William Colby later stated flatly, "We had nothing to do with it." And yet, questions lingered, because Giancana's death solved too many problems for too many powerful people. He would never testify. He would never clarify the truth. He would never contradict anyone. In the end, Sam Giancana died the way many men in his world do, surrounded by theories, stripped of certainty, and buried beneath silence. No single explanation has ever been proven. Perhaps Bastogne was right. There wasn't just one reason. There were a million. And in that world, you only need one moment for all of them to catch up to you. Sam Giancana ruled Chicago's underworld. He negotiated with governments. He shaped history from the shadows. But when the time came, none of that mattered. Because power protects you while you are useful. After that, it disappears.